Hi guys, quick intro for today's podcast. So I am sitting down with Mitch Zandes in this one. He is a clinical dietitian based out of New York, works in a hospital as a nutritionist and dietitian, and we get into the topic of nutrition and healthy diet and specific supplements and specific foods for healthy cognition and for creativity. So a lot of really cool information in terms of that piece. We also just get into, broad strokes nutrition and, things he's encountered being a dietitian and his path to get there. So it's a really cool conversation. Also, super, super nice guy to jump on the podcast, especially this being one of the, first episodes. So all around, just really happy with how it turned out. Really cool guy. I was really happy to sit down and talk with him. Hope you enjoy it. Now, if you want, and I hope you do, definitely go check him out. You can find him on Instagram at fit_by_Mitch. That's where he does a lot of social media, his blog, etc. You can find all other ways to contact him from there. He's coming out with a website in the near future. A lot of that's kind of towards the end of the episode, if that interests you. But aside from that, if you like this episode, if he interests you, or if, you just want to reach out, definitely show some support. I'd appreciate it. And that's it. Hope you enjoy it. One, thanks for coming. I super, super appreciate it. This is in its early stages, but you've been super cool, willing to jump on with me and have some of these conversations. So first of all, I appreciate it. I really do. It's super cool. That being said, why don't we kind of jump in, maybe introduce yourself, kind of give a little background about yourself and what influenced you to become a dietitian.
All right. So my name is Mitch Zandes. I'm out here in Upper East Side of Manhattan. I'm a clinical dietitian. So basically what that means is I'm employed by a large medical center. I work inpatient in the hospital, so visiting patients at bedside while they're hospitalized, which is a little bit different than your typical nutrition counseling. So my main roles there would basically be being a consultant to the doctors and other practitioners in the hospital on what diets the patients are getting, if they need diet education, whether it's for kidney disease, diabetes, cancer. And then also a big role of the dietitians is going out and doing enteral and parenteral nutrition, which would be nutrition, through a tube that goes through your nose or your stomach, and then also parenteral nutrition, which would be through the veins, intravenously. Now, I definitely did not start here. So when I was in high school, I was overweight. I was a chronic smoker, and I really didn't get into fitness or nutrition or health at all until I got to college. So I went to Clemson University. I was an English major, and I just kind of started working out, trying to, move away from the lifestyle I had been living. And I really fell in love with it. I kind of have an addictive personality to begin with. So when I go with something, I go all out.
Yep.
And I fell in love with nutrition. Well, nutrition and fitness hand in hand. I became a personal trainer. And then once I had established myself as a personal trainer, I decided to go back to school for nutrition. So the way I decided I wanted to explore nutrition is that while I love fitness so much, I didn't see myself being in the trenches, being a personal trainer for many years. I kind of enjoyed that a lot, but I saw more opportunities with nutrition. I saw that I could continue personal training, but I could also expand my horizons to nutrition counseling. I could work with athletes in nutrition, or I could potentially work in a hospital, which I ended up pursuing that route in the end because I was just fascinated by the work that was going into it.
Super cool. This is one of our first time speaking. So this is funny because I can't honestly see you as like overweight and a chronic smoker. It's funny. That's pretty incredible, man. Seriously. From what I've seen, just like seeing you on Instagram and super, super fit, very health conscious by, the foods you're promoting through your Instagram and stuff. So man, props to you on that.
Thanks, man. It's been a wild last 10 years. I'm turning 27 on Saturday.
Awesome.
So
Happy birthday.
July 7th will be my birthday. And if somebody told me 10 years ago that I was going to be a dietitian with a blog, reaching out to people and promoting health, I would have laughed in your face, man. I would have never imagined I'm doing what I'm doing today, and I'm blessed for it.
That's incredible, man. That's awesome. That's awesome. I feel like having a career path where you're helping people is hugely important. I myself, in what I do in my regular job, there's not a lot of that. So I'm in software sales. So there's like virtually none of that, honestly. But having that role where the time you put in, where you've educated yourself, and then you can influence that and, reach out to people and really help people. I feel like that's super cool. So that's one thing I did want to definitely get into today. And, this might be a good time to speak about it, but I wanted to get your input on a good foundational nutrition for, one question is there kind of broad strokes, everyone can apply this, or is it very applied to different people, different ages and such? And then maybe your experience being a dietitian, what you've seen with changes in someone's life. And one thing we see already is you've seen it in your own life. So that's super cool.
Yeah. So to answer the first question, nutrition is highly individualized, right? Everybody's different. And nutrition recommendations, while we do have national guidelines, that's just supposed to appeal to the masses. But when you're a dietitian, you're working with individual people, you have to consider their unique needs, what they have available to them as far as, their access to food, how mobile they are, how willing they are, and how much time they have. So one of the things that goes along with that is, in my own practice, I'm very goal driven. So somebody who is just trying to live their best life and, avoid chronic disease and be healthful and feel good about themselves is going to require much different therapy than somebody who's trying to slim out and have a six-pack.
Yep.
So as a dietitian, when you're working with someone, your primary goal is to draw those goals out of them to figure out how you're going to teach them and which direction you're going to lead them, because it's going to change with each one. So there's no blankets. And as a dietitian, I'm not affiliated. I don't, stand firm on any particular camp, whether it's if it fits your macros, flexible dieting, intermittent fasting, keto, vegan. I think there's a time and a place for all of those, and they may work for somebody, but I'm not at a point in my career or a point where I have a passion for any of them where I'm standing firmly behind them. But if there was one that I would stand behind, I think that would be more of like the vegan diet type. And that's not to say that I think everybody needs to remove animal products altogether to achieve optimal health or fitness. But I think everybody can improve their well-being and do something good for the planet by moving more into that plant-based realm, whether it's just by participating in Meatless Monday or just moving away from insisting on having meat at every meal.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I was just going to move on into the second part where you're asking about seeing changes in people. And you really hit the nail on the head when you said seeing it in myself first, because that's what really pushed me to pursue this. Because, as I said, I came from a background that wasn't so healthful. So when I explored that health and I realized, wow, by what I'm doing, I'm waking up 6 a.m. with full of energy and I can make it throughout the day and I feel great and I can get so much done. If I could somehow get somebody else to feel that and buy into it, then it's not only going to improve their health, but it's going to improve my well-being as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you noticed the influence in yourself and how impactful that was. So to bring that to someone else would be, really fulfilling. That's super cool. That's super, super cool.
And I'll hear it from people. It doesn't take that long to click. If you take somebody who's not been on that path and they start doing it and they start having bowel movements every morning, they start waking up and it doesn't take them 2 hours to shake off whatever they did the night before. It can only be a matter of weeks before they start being, wow, I can't believe I was living like that before.
That's one thing that kind of struck me is energy, difference in energy, waking up immediately, having energy throughout the day. I've noticed it myself, for one, depending on what I'm eating in the day. Of course, it has a huge influence. I've had times, and everyone's had this, but I've gone out to dinner with my girlfriend. One in particular, I remember we went out to dinner and got pizza with her family. And it wasn't regular pizza. Like it was like thick, like mostly cheese, you know? And I ate a bunch of it, and it was Saturday, and it was like 8 p.m. and I fell asleep at like 9. Like we'd usually be up till midnight. I felt horrible. I fell right asleep. You know, so on the contrary, if I'll come home at lunch and I'll eat something where it's like cheese, nuts, like I'll have avocado salsa, and I do have like some lean protein. I'll have some chips, but I try not to have like a ton, but just clean, healthy food. I feel way better. It's a clean energy. It's not like a spike and then a fall, you know? So that's one thing I mean, I also kind of like to dig into is, do you remember that transition from going from overweight and smoking? I used to be a smoker as well. And I remember that life. It wasn't, you just didn't feel good. You didn't feel good at all. So from there to here must be like incredibly different.
Yeah. And it wasn't a smooth transition. It wasn't like an overnight thing. You know, one reason why I feel so strong about speaking on certain topics is because I've done it all, I feel like. So when I came into this journey, I knew nothing. You know, all I had was YouTube. I had internet resources, and I kind of had to find my own way. So in my early stages, I did Herbalife. I did, you know, pretty much no carbs at all. I did a style where I would eat what I thought was clean throughout the week, and then have like a binge day on a Friday or Saturday. And so it took me a couple of years to kind of just figure out how it really works. And I don't regret any second of it. I think that was one of the best ways for me to become a master in my own right of nutrition, is just by trying all these different things and learning by failure.
Super cool. And I think it's almost more powerful when it takes some time too, you know, then you've really worked for something and you see a real change in yourself, and it's, you know, then it's easier than, oh, okay, it happened in one day. Who really cares? You know, so it's those long lasting, you know, you put in the time, the hard work over time, and you see a real transition over 6 months or a year or 2 years. And then it really means something, you know? So that's super cool. So I have a ton of stuff here, and I hope I don't go in crazy directions. I don't know. It might happen. Things will come up I might want to just pick your brain about. We talked about an ideal foundation, and of course that's not personalized. So one direction I wanted to move into, and you kind of mentioned this as well, is talking about the gut biome and its connection with, you know, overall nutrition for one, and of course cognition. So that was super cool that you brought that up, because I've looked into it on my own, and I have some really, really weird stories about it, but I want to let you kind of get into it first, and then we'll jump around with it.
So gut microbiome right now is probably one of the hottest topics we're seeing. Everybody's talking about it, and the research is really just exploding, exploring all different areas. Now, the foundation of the gut microbiome is basically an immunity. So we have, you know, millions of bacteria in our gut, and it's a commensal relationship. So basically what this means is that the bacteria down there depend on us to live, and we depend on them to live. Now, a lot of people find this a foreign concept, because when we think of bacteria, we're usually thinking of pathogens. So people get bacterial infections and they get sick from it. But these are actually bacteria that are keeping us healthy. And as I've already said, they play a big role in our immunity, but they also have various other roles they're finding. So the gut actually produces a ton of nutrients. So things like B vitamins, vitamin K, biotin, and another one which really falls into line with the concept of your show and your whole thing with creativity and cognition is that a lot of the serotonin and the dopamine neurotransmitters that are directly affecting our cognition are produced, or at least stored, down there in the gut. So that's one mechanism by which the gut is affecting the brain. Now, the other one would be the vagus nerve. And essentially, the gut bacteria can stimulate the vagus nerve, and this opens up the channel of communication between the gut and the brain. So a lot of this it's pretty well established. I would say it is more on the theoretical end. It's kind of hard to duplicate in humans right away. But I think it's pretty well established that how we treat our bacteria in our gut is going to have an impact on how, we fight off infection and how we feel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a couple different ways that you can affect the gut microbiome. And so food, just general nutrition, is perhaps the most profound from a nutritional standpoint. And that would be, make sure you get your fruits and vegetables and your whole grains in, because these foods have what are called prebiotic fibers.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are foods that go undigested in your small intestine. They find themselves in the large intestine, and the bacteria down there feast on them. And this is where the production of, things like short chain fatty acids and the serotonin and the dopamine, those are how they're produced. So prebiotics would be the first one. And then the second one would be probiotics. Mm-hmm. And probiotics are very popular right now in grocery stores. I think the one that most people identify with would be yogurt.
Uh-huh.
So people know it as a food source of probiotics. Then we have other things like if you find a refrigerated sauerkraut, not like not like a Sabrett sauerkraut, more of a fancy one that you'd find in like a Whole Foods.
Uh-huh.
And then also kimchi. Kimchi is like a pickled vegetable or a mix of vegetables. And then tempeh would be like a fermented tofu. So it's basically foods that are fermented and produce bacteria as part of that natural process.
So one thing you mentioned, and I think I'd seen this other places, is that their neurotransmitters up to, was it like 90%? Or maybe that's not the correct number, but there's neurotransmitters that are in the gut. So at that stage, and this might be going in kind of a different direction, but at that stage, if we know they're neurotransmitters, they're kind of, does that have any play on cognition, or what's that connection being established? Do you know like what the importance are with those neurotransmitters at that level?
I think it's safe to say that it does. I mean, if that high level of serotonin or dopamine is being housed down there or being produced, mm-hmm. It's got to come from somewhere, right? And if we do have an open channel of communication with the brain through the gut, like I said, it's hard in the research to really connect those things directly. Right. But it's, if X is this, Y is this, then we have the possibility of Z. And then to confirm that, you have people that have disrupted gut bacteria, whether it's just through poor diet, a highly westernized, highly processed food diet, or somebody who's been heavily treated with bacteria, you probably see decreased levels of those neurotransmitters. It kind of weeds it out and helps you identify the potential of them.
Yeah, that's incredible because, one, just to kind of take a side note here, just because we want to, of course, kind of talk on the building blocks for creativity. Of course, it's healthy nutritional foundation, healthy cognition, and of course, dopamine and serotonin are going to play a part in that chemical composition to get in that creative state, right? So the little research I've done here is that it's a healthy mix of dopamine and serotonin. Dopamine kind of giving you that freedom to look into, now this is very high level, but freedom to look into multiple ideas, whereas that serotonin keeps you focused. I hope I didn't flip those, but it's interesting to see that, okay, of course, having that healthy gut biome is going to have some influence there. I think that's easy to say. This is kind of interesting. And let me kind of date this. This was at least 2-ish years ago. I was taking an antibiotic for my skin. So I had worse acne at that point. And I went to the dermatologist and they prescribed me, I think it was amoxicillin, but it was an antibiotic. And the craziest thing happened. So I had used this in the past, no problem. I took 2. This is a new prescription. And the second day I got my first panic attack I've ever had, maybe second actually. The first one I had maybe 5 years ago, and it was very minor. But in the time around that period, none whatsoever. I got the first one after I was taking amoxicillin the second day. Then they cascaded and got worse. So I had the first one. I was in IKEA with my girlfriend. I remember that. Went back. I'm actually from Tucson. So I was at an internship. They started coming. And then suddenly I was getting them like every few days. And I mean, I went to the hospital a couple times. Like I didn't know what they were. I thought I was having a heart attack.
Wow.
Like it was crazy. And this was about a 6-month period where I would get these, I would worry about going certain places because I'm like, what if I'm going to get a panic attack? I had low dose Xanax, which helped if I got one. But I swear to God, I remember on Speedway, I went into a Whole Foods. I started buying food that was high in probiotics. I know that the research isn't really there, but I'm absolutely sure that when I started eating probiotics, it got better. I mean, no, it could be placebo, but I swear it was a 6-month period of nothing and then a drastic change. And I was sure that those experiences I was having had to do with my gut because one, it was around any time, like maybe it was before, after I'd eat. I think it was after I'd eat, they'd kick them off. Like I would worry about what I was eating because sometimes it was just like snap of the finger. It was incredible. And I told this to my girlfriend and she was like, well, maybe, I'm not sure. And she believed me, but other people were like, well, I don't know. I don't know about probiotics, and then I was listening to a podcast with, are you familiar with Vice with Shane Smith?
I'm not.
Okay. So it's a small time news source. It's actually out of New York. So it's like more independent news kind of thing. And they do YouTube videos and stuff, but he had a story. I was listening to him on a podcast and it was someone in his family or someone had the exact same situation. It was panic attacks because their gut biome got screwed up. And then once they fixed that with probiotics, it changed. I mean, it was the same story. It was incredible. So when you mentioned that, I wanted to bring that up and maybe get your take on it. If you had seen anything like that, or at least the gut biome, like really screwing up functionality in people's lives, maybe at that level, because I'm sure for me, that's what it was. I'm sure.
I certainly believe it. And even if it was placebo effect, it's still an effect.
Yeah.
If that's what it did it. But it's certainly possible. I think there are some skeptics out there that, don't really believe in the probiotics. They think if there's some kind of disruption down there, if you're just eating a probiotic supplement, they think, most of it is just flowing right through you.
Right.
But there are these stories of people having these, great recoveries. And this is the first one I'm hearing of somebody having panic attacks like this and being able to kind of come out it with the probiotics.
Yeah.
But you see this more in people who are having GI issues, whether that's through ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, where they do have a known disruption in that gut bacteria just from having a salt down there in the intestines. So kind of, restoring that gut microbiota and kind of promoting that commensal relationship again can certainly help these patients out. And I've seen that work before.
That's incredible. Yeah. Yeah. It's so weird to think about because, as you mentioned, there's like either a 1-to-1 or maybe a 3-to-1 in terms of, that bacteria cells versus human cells. So typically like at that, you're outnumbered, at least it's 1-to-1, and it to have influence on how you process food and how you feel. So if it's affecting that vagus nerve and then that's affecting mood, I mean, that's kind of incredible to think about. You think about, at least when I'm sitting down, I'm going to work on music, mood is hugely important. I mean, I've had times where if I'm really in a situation that, so just for example, I finished some music recently. I sent it off to pass around and I didn't get a response from some. And it really annoyed me. Like I was really, really frustrated and I spent 2 months and I wanted to be really, really good. And the next day I was like, okay, that's done. I'm going to pick up something new. I'm going to start fresh. And I was excited. I was like, I'm going to start fresh on a new song. That's always like a nice feeling. So, but that day I got nothing done. I was way too annoyed, stressed out, frustrated. I'm sure my cortisol levels were through the roof. And I couldn't get into a space where I was able to just, maybe work on music and it becomes so strange because I've been working on music my whole life and it's gotten, much more as a discipline within like the last 6 months ish. So something I picked back up after I graduated, I started working full time because I had more free time. I needed a hobby, honestly. So, but I approached it in a very disciplined manner where I wanted, maybe 2-3 years out to really put something out there that's meaningful. So I try and be very tuned into how I'm feeling in those states when I'm producing something I'm really proud of, or when I'm just hitting a wall. And it's just interesting to see that. I think at broad strokes, a person could think, oh, okay, you look over here at this very successful creative person. they just have it inherently and that's it, but it's not necessarily that. If you screw up, nutritionally, or if, of course, in this case, your microbiome is screwed up, or you have super high levels of cortisol, everything's going to go out the window. It's like everything's going to change. So it's a really interesting concept to look into, to think about. So many things have to be going in your favor, foundationally with nutrition, sleep, so many different factors. And then you also, of course, have to have the tools of working on something for multiple years to be able to even get there. So it's just such a weird organization of things. And just to really get strange about it, I mean, if you think about it, it's like, okay, we're 3-to-1 or 1-to-1 bacteria versus human cells, and they have influence on your cognition. They have influence on your mood. And so you need that proper foundation to produce good music, in my case, let's say. Well, then who's really doing it at the end of the day? It's a weird, it's such a weird, like, organization of what we have internally, like this weird microbiome that allows us to live properly, and if you stay super high level, you're like, oh, I'm me, my name's Dalton, blah, blah, blah. And you don't think about these things. It's like, it'll go right over your head, but it's very, very bizarre.
Well, I think there's some people out there that would say that we're living in their world.
Right. Yeah.
They were here long before us, and they're going to be here long after we are. So we're just visitors on their planet.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also crazy. There's one podcast, I want to just mention this, or a documentary or something, where if you think about it, the bacteria is not really in us, because like it's like a tube from our mouth to like our anus. And there's like so it's like a lining. So it's not even really in us either. It's like on the inner lining, which is just also weird to think about. And
well, the gastrointestinal tract is the outside of your body.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It is the outside of your body medically, or however you want to say it. They treat that as the outside of your body. It's not truly inside until it's been absorbed and it's in circulation.
Right. It's weird. It's very strange. It's very, very strange. But yeah, so that's super cool. And I wanted to share that idea with you and just kind of bounce it off you and see what you thought. Because I mean, most people don't have your background that I've been able to speak with, about it and kind of get their reaction. And I swear by it. I'll tell people, and some people agree, more like a Whole Foods type. They're like, oh, absolutely, or some people who are like by the book and eat like the American, standard American diet. They're like, no way, that's, you're talking shit or whatever. So yeah, it's interesting. So there's a lot that I want to get into. Maybe we can spend some time kind of jumping into the studies, some stuff I passed towards you, and then we kind of bounce back and forth, maybe with like tyrosine. So I can start there and kind of share the study. So this is something I kind of stumbled upon. What I planned to do was I was going to do a solo podcast on nutrition creativity. And I wrote out all this information, and I was at work and I kind of had finished a bunch of stuff and I was going to go and record it. And I realized I felt like a total fraud. I was like, I don't know this stuff. I just, I feel like I couldn't speak on it. So I got some information, but then of course we met. So this worked out much better. But so for that study, I found that I forget the researcher's name now. I should have written it down, and I can reference this after the show, but he took a group of people and he gave them tyrosine. Now it wasn't orange juice, which could be interesting because that has sugar and, so there could be some influence there. But he found that when he gave them that tyrosine through orange juice, had them do puzzles, he found that when they came back, took a placebo, and then maybe that was orange juice without tyrosine, took a placebo, did the same set of puzzles, he actually found that there was a better result in the first attempt when they had the tyrosine. And this came out to show in, what they're producing, that it supported convergent thinking rather than divergent. So a little digging in there with convergent, it seems that that's really helpful with, solving puzzles and really focusing in on a certain task and giving a lot of your energy to that and getting through that process. Whereas divergent is more when you are thinking, you're synthesizing different ideas together, and you're kind of letting your mind wander. So I think both are definitely needed, depending on kind of what stage you are in a process where you're maybe deriving something that is creative. I apply it to music. It's, that convergent is going to be very good when I have an idea on, in my kind of on my, whatever it is in my software, and I'm really honed in. I'm trying to think about, what fits properly here versus that divergent thinking, I think would be most useful when I have no ideas and I need something to come to me, so, so I wanted to kind of dive in there, and I know that you passed some information back to me. I want to kind of dive into that, and get your take there.
Yeah. So I think the study is very interesting. It seemed pretty well designed, and I was kind of surprised. It's not really it's an amino acid, and it's very rare that we're like studying amino acids individually. Mm-hmm. So when I first saw the study, I was expecting it to be sponsored by some kind of supplement company, but it really seemed like it was just an exploration of students at a university that were doing it. I was pretty impressed with the design, and it's very intriguing. But I think just to back up for any listeners who don't even know what tyrosine is, it's basically just an amino acid, which is a building block of proteins. Mm-hmm. So it's essentially it's a non-essential amino acid, meaning that we make enough of it in the body. Mm-hmm. And it's also found in foods. So this is not something that you have to take in a pill or supplement form. You find it in a wide range of animal products, but you also find it in some plant foods like peanuts, almonds, pumpkin seeds, and then soy products as well. So whether that's just straight up edamame or tofu. So I was looking at some numbers, and the supplement that they gave was 2 grams, right? It was 2 grams of tyrosine. And at first I thought, all right, this is probably like a super dose that they're giving, but it seems pretty achievable to go well above 2 grams just from your normal diet. So while I think this is one study, it's certainly not representative of, a broad range of evidence, because I think when you look at the totality of the evidence on tyrosine, it's probably doesn't have much of an impact on much of anything. If you look, it's not a highly reproducible finding.
Oh, right.
But
right.
It doesn't mean to say it doesn't do anything at all.
Yeah.
I just think that if we're going to, open it as a possibility, it's probably important for those same researchers to go back and compare that same group they did with the orange juice with people who are getting a meal that's going to have an equivalent amount of tyrosine. Because then that kind of teases out whether or not this is, tyrosine in isolation or tyrosine as part of a food component, which is going to have more things to offer as far as just energy, which is going to be the way they did it with orange juice. It's going to have, say they did it with, like a smoothie with some kind of peanut, soy, and maybe like a soy protein isolate or something, even though that might not be the highest quality, and banana, maybe they did a smoothie. It'd be interesting to see what the findings would be between those two groups, because certainly in the smoothie, there's going to be a more complex and varied profile of nutrients. And I'd be willing to bet that if it was able to be reproduced, that we'd see better results with the whole food, because we know that nutrition is never in isolation.
Yeah.
So as much as we, try to find supplements and individual nutrients that are doing things, our body is much more complex than that. So getting it in the whole food source, we're getting things that you can't duplicate in the laboratory.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of people will look at it and say, okay, they look at food as just food. And then they're like, okay, what supplements can I take to get even better? They don't think of it as a holistic view where they're all in the right food if you're eating the proper food. It's making sure that you're eating the proper food and you're getting in that wide variety of things that we, through evolution, we're supposed to thrive on. It's kind of as simple as that. And so that kind of leads me into something I definitely wanted to pick your brain about. And I feel like coming from a medical background, working in and around patients who have diabetes and such, working in a hospital, I'm sure that you see firsthand the effects of, the standard American diet that's high in sugar. I'll let you kind of go off there. I'd imagine that seeing that difference between, that healthy foundational, ideal nutrition versus the American diet where you walk into the supermarkets, okay, let's get a granola bar. It looks healthy. And you look at the nutrition facts and it's, 20 grams of sugar or you get yogurt and it's 30 grams of sugar or whatnot. So
it's like a three-headed monster of a lack of education in the general public, and then also food environment. The food that is available is not giving us the best chance at optimizing our health. And then the third head, which is the most unfortunate, is food companies and marketing is kind of, deceiving the public into thinking that things are certain health foods when they're not. And I think two glaring examples for me as a dietitian is going into the yogurt aisle and the cereal aisle.
Oh yeah, cereal. Yeah.
Right. So most yogurts and cereals are nothing more than just glorified candy.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So cereal, perhaps the most unfortunate because their target audience is children.
Yeah.
And so they've kind of manipulated the cereals, things like Lucky Charms or Frosted Flakes, that they can now say whole grain, part of a heart healthy diet.
Yeah.
And then they're fortifying them with nutrients, vitamins and minerals. And so they can also advertise those vitamins and minerals. So you get somebody, the general public doesn't know how to read a food label. They don't understand what high in quality ingredients are or what they look like. And so they do know that we need vitamins and minerals, and they do know that whole grains or whole wheat is something we should be striving for. And so if they see those on the box, they say, oh, Lucky Charms is going in a new direction. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's still the same old Lucky Charms that, we were probably eating in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And these are just, they're just junk foods that are passing for having potential health benefits.
Yeah. I want to know if you're familiar kind of with this history, because I think it was 60s, 70s, around that time where there were studies around what is causing Americans to be fat. Is it fat or is it sugar? And there was, I don't remember his name. I should have had this. I didn't know we kind of go here, but there was one researcher who did some study at that time that showed that it was fat that we needed to remove from our diet, and sugar was okay. You could have sugar in your diet. It's no problem. You just need to remove fat. So have low fat. And that changed how nutrition was founded pretty much since then. And it's only now that people are coming around and realizing that's not true at all. You need high fat, high healthy fat. You need sugar naturally if it's in an orange maybe, and you shouldn't be eating oranges all day, but if you're going to get your sugar in, maybe through an orange or something like that, but it should be high fat, lean protein, and healthy carbohydrates.
Yeah, absolutely. And the person you're talking about is Ansel Keys.
Yeah.
And he's one of the most renowned nutrition researchers in the history of the science.
Yeah.
And so not only is he famous for that, but he's also kind of the one, if I'm not mistaken, that brought the Mediterranean diet pattern to the table. And that was based off a study he did. He went to several countries out there and just observed what the people were eating and the lifestyle they had. And so, I don't know if it's necessarily high fat, but yeah, I think there is a good room for fat in our diet, and then focusing on those healthy carbohydrates. But that controversy there with the fat and the sugar. So he was responsible for pushing for saturated fat being the main focus in cardiovascular disease. But at the same time, he had a counterpart over in the United Kingdom. And that guy's name is slipping out of my mind right now because he kind of faded out of the story and out of the history. And he was saying that, no, it's the refined sugar. Oh. Now, there was some stuff that came out a couple of years ago. I think it was either 2016, 2017, where they actually unearthed some documents that showed, I think it was like a meat industry or somebody was getting paid off to, I think, no, this is what it was. It was the sugar industry that was trying to pay off Ansel Keys to vilify fat, to kind of shift the blame. So that was really profound when that came out. But then I even saw more recently some people saying that, it wasn't so clear cut as they were saying in that 2016, 2017 article. So at one point I was very convinced that that's what happened, is the sugar industry paid them off, because that's a very plausible thing. We know in this country that the sugar industries, the alcohol industries, and big corporations like that have the power to do things, influence research, manipulate data. But now it doesn't seem so clear cut on that issue, and who knows? It may just be the powers battling back and forth. But I think it is clear that avoiding refined carbohydrates is a good idea. And then also avoiding saturated and trans fats for the most part as well. It's all about, finding that balance, but there's no reason to suggest that, having a good amount of fat in your diet, whether it's from, nuts and seeds or avocado and some maybe from animal products, is not going to significantly, put you in a state of poor health.
Right. Yeah. I think now I'm sure, and you've of course looked into this more than I have. And a lot of times I think people can go down the wrong path by, being like, oh, I saw it in a documentary, so it has to be true. You just don't know. But, from my understanding, there are definitely, powers that be in terms of, sugar that want to make sure that sugar stays in the foods. There's not a lot of research out there to show that sugar's bad because, it's making God knows how much money in the food industry, and everything has sugar in it. It's just, it's pretty incredible. This kind of leads me into something. Have you seen the documentaries called That Sugar Film by chance?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I try to stay away from these Netflix Netflix documentaries for the most part.
It's definitely, it's a little that way. So it's a guy, and the reason I like it is it's one guy who goes from a diet similar to what you're proposing, healthy grains, healthy fats, healthy animal source protein, just get a healthy diet. If you were to go in a grocery store around the perimeter, right, rather than going in the center with the yogurts and the cereal, and he switches to everything that's promoted as health food comes from refined food, and he got the same amount of calories from all the refined food that he was eating before for 60 days, and he was also getting in 200 grams or 200 milligrams or 200 grams of sugar a day through those foods. So it was a lot. He was drinking, the orange juices and the apple juices that are just, loaded with sugar. And he put on fat. He got fatty liver disease within 60 days. He was pre-diabetic. All of this was in 60 days. I mean, it's incredible that, of course, that's going to have a huge influence on your well-being. I mean, it's right there,
For sure. I'm not familiar with the film, but it sounds like one of these films that are like really taking it to the extreme. Yeah. Whether it's, they came out with The Magic Pill, which is a keto film. And then they had What the Health, which is the basically vegan propaganda film.
Yeah.
And, I think, sugar is a big problem. It's a huge problem in our country, but I don't think that having a small amount of added sugar, refined sugar in your diet is going to lead you down a path of that, right? Yeah. It's not going to send you into turmoil, and all foods do fit. So you can you can still get some added sugar in your diet.
Yeah.
But it's interesting you say that. If he really was true to sticking to balancing his calories out, it shouldn't suggest that he would put on weight to that degree.
Right.
I'd be interested to see how official that is with him tracking his calories and making sure that the energy is in balance. Because as much, I put a huge focus. I'm not a numbers guy. I'm not a macros guy where I'm tracking calories or anything of that such. I'm a big, food choice advocate. It's all about making the right choices most of the time. Yeah, I think if the calories were close to what he was getting prior and he was not shifting weight, he shouldn't have had that increased weight gain.
Yeah.
The energy balance is the primary focus, and then food quality is right up there with it.
Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
As far as the fatty liver goes, that's really interesting. And certainly it's going kind of out of my realm as a dietitian to talk about like the pathogenesis of fatty liver and why that happened. That's more of, a medical role. But I do know that, fatty liver is not hard to develop. Uh-huh. So say you go on a vacation to the Bahamas and you're drinking beers, you're drinking tequila all weekend, and you're eating like a king, you could easily come back with elevated enzymes in your liver.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't take a lot, a couple consecutive nights of binge drinking. Uh-huh. And you could, if you went to the doctor on a Monday morning, your liver enzymes could be elevated.
Wow.
So I'm also interested to know like how they worked him up. Did they do whatever imaging? Did they do like a MRI, CT scan, whatever they do to find out, if you actually have fatty liver, or this was just based on a blood test?
Right.
Because if it's based on a blood test, it's not always the most accurate way to assess that disorder.
That's interesting. I think it was a blood test. So that, they might have had that in their back pocket and known like, oh, we could, and it would change that quickly,
And that's exactly what those films do.
Right.
Those films, they go into it, they have an agenda because, sex sells, right? They need to make it sexy. They need to have some kind of profound finding at the end. And that's why I try to steer people away from watching those because, you watch one of those and all of a sudden you're become an expert on whatever they were trying to push, whether it's keto or something. So I 100% agree that moving into that lifestyle is, dangerous to health. But I think at the same time, I don't know the film, but it probably could have been done in a more diplomatic manner with a more official, I think a more diplomatic and like official way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's much more challenging to read the study. So my girlfriend is a PhD student. I only have a bachelor's, but it was in engineering. So we're both more familiar with, looking at the data, especially her looking at the data as she reads, research articles all day. And of course, that's much more difficult to go through and look at those different pieces and synthesize all the information through multiple research articles. It depends on the field too. I think nutrition, since there's so many things happening in the human body, you can have an article that's produced through research that states one thing, but they're always not saying go and do X, Y, and Z because there's so many factors. They can say looking towards this, and this is kind of what you want to kind of keep in mind here. But it's hard to give, of course, a blanket statement of this is true or this is not true. It's hard to do that, I guess is what I'm saying, to go and synthesize the research.
Very hard.
Yeah.
It's very hard. And it's kind of where you marriage, as a practitioner, at some point you have to marriage your foundation in science with some kind of art, right? So you have to take your foundation in science, you have to take your personal observations, and then we all have biases as well.
Oh, yeah.
And you kind of marriage those three things together to kind of form your practice and your beliefs.
Yeah.
So I find it hard when there's people online that say they're strictly evidence-based.
Yeah.
Which I try to be. You go into my blog, I have references for everything I write, but it's always some kind of bias behind whatever you're speaking on.
Yeah.
And that just forms from your personal experiences, whether just in your own experiences or your experiences in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That just, I can't agree with how true that is, because you look at that, and I mean, just today in politics, not to go down that route, we won't. It's so hard because where people are getting their information, you kind of become in a bubble. I'm sure that's the same way with nutrition. You kind of find yourself, especially probably with social media, bouncing the same ideas around those same people, and they're all supporting that idea. And then it's, oh my God, this has to be right. Look at all these people who say it's right. I know this is right. And then contrary evidence, you just know sometimes you don't even communicate with those people.
Absolutely. And I see that a lot in my own community. There's very few dietitians right now who are embracing the ketogenic diet for everyday use. And I'd be one of them. I'm not somebody who thinks that people necessarily need to be on a ketogenic diet by any means. And I do have my concerns about it. But I am willing to listen to other people's thoughts at this point, whether it's on keto. Intermittent fasting has some promising results in the research. And so it's important for anybody to not kind of pigeonhole themselves into one belief or one culture of nutrition without at least embracing the idea that there's other ways that are vastly different that could work for people in the same manner that it's worked for you or your patients.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's individualized too, which is so crazy to throw into the mix because, you can find things that work, but then that might only work for certain people.
Well, because the nutrition goes beyond just what you're eating on your plate, right? It's part of our every waking moment, at least for most people. whether it's a social event, whether it's bonding with family,
Yep.
a lot of things in our culture are surrounded with food, and food becomes a part of our life more so than and most other things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it becomes a ritual. Like and this is probably more bordering on addiction, but I have to have coffee. I mean, all the time. Like there's almost always a coffee with me, and it becomes a ritual. I wake up, I have coffee right away. If I forget to make coffee the night before, because I'll brew it, I put it in the fridge because I like iced coffee. If I don't have that, I'm like freaking out. I'm like, okay, how can I get to Starbucks before I go to work? It's incredible. And then you also find that with smoking cigarettes, or if a person is very dependent on a high sugar diet, they're the same. It's an addiction, and I would imagine in both cases, I felt this my same way. You're like, well, you feel a certain way after you have that cigarette or that sugar rush, and you're like, okay, well, this is, I just need this, and you don't know what the other side feels like too. And I guess I'm getting more into addiction there, but it's incredible because you can, if you really start to think about it, you can be a human guinea pig on yourself and test these things and see what comes out the other side in terms of, testing things with nutrition and such and seeing how you feel,
Absolutely. You have a long life to live, so you might as well, if something's not working for you, and even if it is, it's always worth it to give something else a try and see what happens.
Yeah. So I wanted to kind of jump into a couple things too. One, this is another one I passed your way that I kind of stumbled upon. This is anandamide, and hopefully I don't butcher some of these. But with anandamide, I think from what I found, it was in chocolate. And researchers, before they had found anandamide, which this is going to give you that feeling of bliss. It's known as a bliss molecule. It's attributed, I think, to the runner's high as well. So when you're, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that runner's high that people are experiencing, that's due to anandamide, I believe. And researchers, when they first were understanding receptors in the brain, they found a receptor for THC, which is, from cannabis. And they didn't know why we had these receptors. People are thinking, well, are we evolutionarily designed to be, ingesting marijuana for the THC to bind to these anandamide receptors? And then they found later that there's this anandamide floating around that binds to those receptors. And then that's where you're getting that runner's high. Now, I probably butchered some of this, so you can correct me in parts that I screwed up there. But that was interesting because another guy, and now he was just on a podcast I was listening to. I'm going to reference names following this podcast, but he's researching flow state. And flow is when you almost feel, and you may have experienced this in times in your life where you feel like you're a passenger and time supposedly dissolves a bit. Your personality dissolves. It's not in a drug state. It's just a frame of mind you can get into. And it happens that when you're in this quote unquote flow state, you are really creative at the same point. And he said, tied in with this is the presence of this anandamide, which I just have some notes here, promotes lateral thinking. It allows your brain to hold on to more memories, and you can synthesize more memories. Or synthesize more ideas rather. So of course, that's very high level looking at complexity of neurochemistry. It's such a heavy topic, but I wanted to kind of get your take there. Being in chocolate, is that something to even look into, and maybe just kind of continue to dive on that piece?
Yeah, I think it is very interesting that we find it in chocolate, and because chocolate is a substance that we have feelings of pleasure associated with it, and so it becomes a question of, is this just a coincidence, or if there's actual an effect of the anandamide? And from what I understand, it's not found in many other foods. So it's kind of cool that it falling into one of my favorite foods of all time, chocolate.
Yeah.
When I was preparing for this, I actually came across a paper from a researcher at Nestle. And usually I try to read these, kind of carefully because they're being funded by the source. But he was actually kind of downplaying the effects of anandamide. So while it's present, what they found in the cocoa or the chocolate they've looked at is that the levels are low enough that they're probably not having a sizable effect.
Mm.
So that isn't to say that the anandamide is not doing anything, but this particular researcher, he went on to say, the reality is that a gift of chocolate is a familiar courtship ritual that makes people feel good and induces feelings of being in love. So it may not be that actual anandamide that they found in the chocolate that's producing kind of that runner's high feeling or ability to engage in that flow state, but it may be more just our association with that food that kind of induces those feelings along the way. So it doesn't mean that it's impossible, and because I think it's a relatively unexplored component, not only of chocolate, but also of food in general. And if there are people who are looking for this now in foods, I wouldn't be surprised to see in the next 5 to 10 years that there's other foods that it's popping up in. And then from that point, maybe there can be more of an exploration of how it's affecting us.
Interesting. Yeah. No, that one kind of jumped out at me as being strange. The fact that it binds to THC receptors is like so, or the receptor is very similar, was like so interesting to me. You mentioned that with the dark chocolate as well, is it, I'm going to butcher this, is it flavanols? Is that correct?
Yeah. So it falls under, think of it as the broadest category being polyphenols. And then under that, you have the flavonoids, which are a class of polyphenols. And then as part of the flavonoids, there's the flavanols.
Okay.
And that's what is in chocolate that's really been attributed to the potential cardiovascular effects. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that it's not your chocolate that you're getting in a Hershey Kiss.
Yeah.
This is talking about cacao or cocoa, which is basically the derived plant. So you take, these if you ever see a cocoa tree, there are these large pieces of fruit on the cocoa tree that they come by and they chop them off with machetes. And then they extract the seeds from the inside. The seeds are in there in a pod. And you have to soak and ferment the beans, and then you roast them. And from that point, you can actually get the shell off of them, and you have a little inside piece, which would be a cacao nib. These are foods that you can get at a health food store, and they're pretty bitter. So there's not a whole lot of people are eating them normally, but I know a handful of dietitians who do it, and I've had them myself. And they're nice on like yogurt or maybe some kind of granola. But so from those cacao nibs, you have very high levels of flavanols. And what the flavanols have been shown to do is that they increase the production of nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is a potent vasodilator, which basically means it helps the blood vessels relax and increases blood flow throughout the body. So in a medical sense, we do have vasodilators. Nitroglycerin would be a medication, or even something like Viagra is a vasodilator. What it does is it increases that blood flow. And traditionally what that's being used for is to help with chest pain or angina, and as well as high blood pressure. But in the sense of food, you're not going to have nearly as big of an impact as those drugs are going to have.
Right.
But you can increase blood flow, or at least improve circulation in some degree. So if you're looking at the potential of chocolate or cocoa or cacao from a cognition standpoint and a creativity standpoint, I think it's interesting to look at the potential for the food causing increased blood flow to the brain and to the rest of your extremities, right? If you're going to be in a creative state, you want to be nice and lax. You want to have blood flowing everywhere.
Yep.
And so I found that to be a potential role for chocolate in fostering creativity, kind of marrying it with that the already associations we have with pleasure and feelings of ritual.
Interesting. Yeah, because that one's strange. Unfortunately, it's not the milk chocolate as you mentioned, but yeah, it's almost that placebo effect. Not necessarily the same, but you mentioned if you have that chocolate and it's going to give you that feeling, you can almost anticipate that feeling coming on when you're about to eat chocolate. And of course, that changes your perspective and it changes your mental state and your cognition at that point. It's going to have some influence for sure on whatever you're working on. So that's really interesting. I mean, I haven't personally played with it. One thing I plan to do more is to play with some of the ideas, especially following our conversation, and to just see how it has influence. It would take a few weeks of continued use, I would imagine, to really see if I found some changes. And then I think they'd be so minor, it'd be really tough to track as well, especially in a short term. I think it's something I want to play with. That being said, on kind of trying some of these things and seeing how it influences your day to day. I mean, the biggest one, and we were just speaking about it a moment ago, would have to be coffee. I mean, it has the most profound effect from taking you from zero, especially in the morning, cloudiness. You can't form a sentence to suddenly 30 minutes after drinking your
razor
coffee.
Sharp.
Yeah. One thing I found was really interesting was I was sure that it was going to have positive effects for creativity. Now, it's kind of the same idea, I think, with tyrosine. And of course, that was one study, and we don't even know if that's really repeatable necessarily. But I think at least with coffee, it seems more to me that it would emphasize convergent thinking rather than divergent, because of course, when you are going to sit down and study, let's say you have that coffee, it can help you hone in a bit, and you're really focused on that task at hand. Ideally, your mind isn't wandering and you can really focus in and get whatever that is done. So for that reason, some of the research or researchers were stating, because I'm not versed enough in this area to really go and kind of dig through the research. But from what I saw at a very high level was some researchers were saying that coffee is actually not beneficial for that state of mind you want to get into where you're in that flow state, or you're kind of stepping aside and letting kind of ideas flow through you, or letting your mind wander and kind of come up and bring different ideas together. It's more useful when you want to focus in on that certain task. And for me, that makes sense just because I drink coffee so much. I do have like one weird kind of bit about this, I guess. So typically when I work on music, it's late at night. Throughout the day when I can, when I get home from work. But my most effective time working on this is at around 10:30 at night to about 1 a.m. And that's when, the dog's asleep, my girlfriend's asleep, the lights are off, it's dark, it's silent. And I just, I can sit there and I can really let my mind wander, and I feel like I can let my mind wander at the same point as I can also be very honed into what I'm working on at that moment. And I have played with this because with coffee, because let's say 3 or 4 months ago, I would let's say start around 10:30, my girlfriend's gone to sleep. I would drink some coffee and then start working on music or whatnot. In the last 3 months, I haven't. I don't touch coffee at 10:30 at night because, I shouldn't be regardless. But I have found, I think, a noticeable difference in my ability to be in like this very kind of easy state. I don't really know how to describe it, but I think it's more conducive to coming up with ideas. So that's one thing I wanted to just mention and kind of get your take on coffee. I mean, we bounce back and forth about this just over text and on Instagram and such. But I mean, of course, everyone loves coffee. Yeah. So I'd like to kind of hear what you have to say there.
I definitely have the same experience. And I think my experience is kind of in line with what the researchers have said. And I don't have any, evidence to back this up or any good, physiological mechanism. But I definitely do find that some of my best thoughts come, when I'm out walking or in the shower. It's not when I'm sitting down to actually nail down blog posts or videos or whatever I'm doing. So I do find that my most creative moments come at these innocent times where I'm not necessarily trying to engage in my thoughts. It's kind of just letting the mind wander. So I definitely think there is some truth to it. But I find it interesting because the whole foundation of coffee, and going back into its history, is that it is a drink to fuel creativity. Yeah. And so when I was doing graduate school at NYU here in Manhattan, I took a class, an elective, on the history of beverages. And so it was mostly focused on alcohol, but we did do a little bit of dabbling into coffee. And the first coffee shops were in 17th century in London. And basically it was just an area for men to get together, drink some coffee, and come up with new ideas and share ideas. So it's kind of interesting in that respect, because what you uncovered, which I also agree with, is that a light amount of alcohol can actually embrace and induce those creative thoughts.
Yeah.
And so if you look at how coffee and alcohol kind of go through their history, there's kind of that divide between coffee being that sobering intellectual beverage and the alcohol being quite the opposite. But if you kind of, just do a little bit of the alcohol, maybe you're having more of that actual sobering and, that creative mindset coming along. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah. I've seen some research there to agree exactly with that point. Is they said, and I don't know if it's actually very good for you. I think it's probably pretty bad for you because it's a stimulant and a depressant, so don't do this in large quantities. But researchers were from one article I read, that the combination of the two, exactly, the coffee would kind of hone you in, and the alcohol could relax you a bit. And a nice medium right in between there can be like a very useful space for getting into that creative space. So that's interesting. I just kind of try and put myself there, and it just always fascinates me as well, because if, let's say, I were to go out, on a Friday or Saturday with my girlfriend and have, a few drinks, or if I got a buzz, I don't know if I've actually sat down and worked on music, but I would imagine it would be like totally different, which is, that whole piece just kind of boggles my mind too, because then it just reinforces that the things you put in your body are going to have a huge influence on what you put out. I mean, it's just, and I think nutrition is so subtle that if you aren't fueling your body properly, you don't even know it. Whereas alcohol or coffee are so drastic and immediate. You're like, oh, okay, well, I see the difference. I know there's a difference, but you may not notice the real changes with that nutritional change until 3 or 6 or 9 months later. And then you almost forget what you felt like before. So you're like, it's hard to track that kind of stuff,
For sure. And I think creativity is an interesting topic when it comes to nutrition, just because it's so varied between artists, right? So I think we're seeing more and more artists and musicians that are taking their nutrition seriously, whether it's, fueling for a concert, making sure you're staying hydrated, making sure you have that lung capacity if you're playing some kind of instrument or you're a vocalist or something. Yep. But then we look at some of the best artists of all time and best musicians of all time, and it's the complete opposite, whether it's alcohol and drug abuse or just completely living like a rock star.
Right.
No concern for health at all. So it's going to be interesting to see where it goes in the future, now that we know what we do about nutrition and how it has an impact on our cognitive function. Where artists are going to take it. And I think you're going to find that the more serious ones, are going to have people in their corner, whether it's managers or just people that are giving them advice, that are going to have their nutrition taken care of, especially when they're on the road touring.
Absolutely. I think it's funny you bring that up because, as you mentioned, so many of these people that we idolize give off this lifestyle, or they live this lifestyle where, they're not treating their body well. And that's so interesting because a lot of times, so one example is, I'm a huge fan of deadmau5, and in my opinion, just writes the most beautiful music. And I've listened to interviews just kind of looking into this idea, and he will start working on music, he says, around 10 or 11 p.m. and he'll be working on things. And then at about 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., he says that he gets so sleep deprived that he will feel delirious. And then that's when his like really aha moments come, or this, he says he allows himself to get out of his own way, and he's sleep deprived. And then that's when he comes up with these great ideas that he'll kind of synthesize in different songs later. He'll kind of piece it together. But it's so bizarre for that reason, because at that point it's counterintuitive. You're doing pretty much harm to your body by depriving yourself. but he almost frames it as he can get out of his own way and kind of let music flow through him rather than being in tight control and very, in tune with your body. He's like trying to get out of his own body, out of his own way almost, So it's really fascinating. I know another piece like Stephen King, of course, like prolific writer, he smoked all the time when he was writing and smoked cigarettes all the time. And when he quit smoking cigarettes, he found that his writing changed and he had a hard time writing at the same level and success as before. So it's just such a strange balance as to what you put in your body that's going to have influence on what comes out. It's really, really very strange.
To add a third instance to that would be, Steve Jobs.
Oh yeah.
Steve Jobs is the one that is notorious. I think he was the one that did it was like a carrot and something, just like very minimalist food. Do you know what the other food was? It was carrots and something else.
Apples or something like that.
Like apples, like a fruit and a vegetable, or very minimalist. Certainly not a recommended diet for anybody.
No.
But it's cool that these extreme things work for these creative minds in different ways.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if it's like a certain mix of course it's going to, I think, be personalized, but then that person stumbles upon whatever that thing is and they find, okay, I'm really hitting something here, whether it's Steve Jobs with carrots and apples or whatnot, or Dead Mouse with not sleeping, whatever they find, they stumble upon. So it's almost like, in that case, it's super personalized to that individual. Whatever changes in their neurochemistry to get them in that right state that something's produced, it's not one size fits all there either. You couldn't go and take Steve Jobs and say, hey, don't sleep, and come up with the iPod. So, he might, maybe nothing will come through at all. It's really, really interesting. Go ahead. Yeah.
I think we all experience an element of that in our lives in one way or another. I mean, somebody may have like a pair of lucky socks that they've worn to an interview and got a job.
Oh, yeah.
So next time they have like a high pressure situation, they're wearing those socks.
Yeah.
Just little things that maybe foster success in one instance, and then it kind of becomes your thing where you try it again.
Yeah. Yeah. Another like kind of in this same line of thinking is, it's interesting. I'd like to kind of, get your take, and I think I'll continue to kind of ask this question when I have more and more conversations. But I think those examples, maybe most Dead Mouse, where he feels like he's kind of removing himself. I don't know if you're familiar, Joe Rogan has a podcast and he's, commentator for the UFC or whatnot. He swears that, and he's a comedian as well, he swears that his most potent ideas that will transform into an idea where, if he's writing or if it's for comedy or whatnot, he feels like he's a beacon and he's only getting out of his own way, maybe even kind of representative of like a flow state. Have you, and you mentioned you kind of get those most creative ideas when you're walking or you're showering. Where do you kind of find yourself when those ideas are coming to you? Do you feel like it's something that you synthesize some ideas, so this is yours, or something just popped into your head and you're like, I don't know how it got here, but this is an awesome idea?
What I think it is I spend a lot of time thinking about where I'm going to take my content, what I'm going to develop. And sometimes that entails me just browsing, the literature, whatever database I'm looking at, trying to find things. And so I'll get to a point where I'm like, all right, I can't think of anything, but I've already looked at so many things and I have ideas running through my head, even if they're in the back of my mind. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if I was just going about my life not trying to find those things, would I have those aha moments in innocent times?
Yeah, yeah.
I think, I'm just processing everything that I've read and all the focus and attention that I've put into finding my next topic or my next venture, what I'm going to do. All of that work continues on in the back of your mind, even when you're trying to shut your mind off. Yeah. And so you're still processing these things, and it just takes a little while for it to come together.
Yeah, no, yeah, because you have to do the work too. You're not going to come up with, or someone who's a famous painter, let's say, if they didn't do all the work leading up to that, and then to have that aha moment, they have all the tools then. It's the same idea. You have to be doing all the work early on, synthesizing all that information, having that sit in the back of your mind, and then suddenly all the things come together at once, and then it pops, and then there's that idea that you're going to run with. So yeah, that's interesting. I think that I want to kind of continue to ask, everyone I speak with kind of about that process. Cause for me, it is weird. I'll hit my head against my computer trying to work on stuff and just nothing's coming. And then I'm working on things, and especially it's almost like I do remove myself, and then suddenly and I'm like, oh, that's cool. Okay, I want to work on that. And then you do enter a different frame of mind where you're like, okay, I'm really focused in on it. All the different things sitting on top of each other in terms of drums and synths and stuff like that. That's different. That's a different mindset. But it's that one where something pops in, you're like, oh, okay, cool, thank you. It's like, I don't know where that came from, but awesome. I'm excited. So cool. So a couple things I want to make sure we touch on. One would be I sent you this. I don't know how deep we want to go into here, but berries with brain-delivered neurotropic factor. So that I understand can kind of dive into some neurogenesis and kind of even anywhere you want to take that. I mean, where do we stand with a connection between what we eat, the neurotransmitters in our brain, and now we're finding in our gut, and if some of those are regenerative in its life, or what's that process?
That's one that's just going to be beyond my scope of practice.
Okay, yeah.
I don't want to I don't want to speak on it. I feel like okay. I'm already pushing the boundaries by diving into neurotransmitters a little bit. So the BDNF, I did see that can find it in some foods, and I think it is also produced inside the body in some way. But as far as the regeneration of neurons and stuff like that, that's just beyond my scope of knowledge.
And that's fine. I mean, I don't want to kind of push you into an area and then this is recorded and people are like, what are you talking? Same with me. Luckily, I'm doing something that's not related to my field. But at the same point, people might listen to my music and listen to my podcast and be like, what are you talking about? With myself, So cool. There was something that came to mind momentarily. This was something I thought was really interesting is, when I was in my undergrad, I took a class, and it was actually, it was like a humanities class that was on astronomy. So it was like a mix between, looking at humanities and astronomy. But the professor showed this chart where he showed that if you are tolling your mind with, puzzles and things that push your brain beyond the limit of where you find comfort, you can actually generate more neurons late into your life. And he was an older guy. He was like 60 or 70. So he was really excited. He was like, I'm going to be okay. Because, this dude I remember he had a degree in electrical engineering and a PhD in astronomy and physics. So he was super smart. But as he got older, he wanted to make sure he didn't lose it. So that's my only one little, anecdotal piece. But that stuff's really interesting. I keep getting back, especially with nutrition. It's like all these things are so strange. And if you aren't really cognizant of what you're doing with your body, what you're putting in your body, you can really, do harm for sure based on what you put in your body, but not live to your full potential for sure. And I think that translates to anything, your work, whatever your work is that you're working on, creative pursuits, hobbies in your life. I mean, it's just, there's like a 1-to-1 correlation where it's like what you put in is kind of what you get out. Yeah,
I agree with that 100%. And nutrition is at the core of all of those, because if you not have your health intact, right, you're not taking good care of your health, most people's hobbies are something more on the active side.
Yeah.
So for instance, my hobbies are playing basketball or going to the park with friends. So, if I'm not taking care of myself in my 20s, it's not going to really affect me. But if I want to keep those hobbies later in life, I need to be able to keep my body in a position that I can do those things.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting how nutrition becomes at the core of a lot of the things that we do. And we've already mentioned that it's ritualistic in our society and our social interactions, but also just in our day-to-day activities, whether it's hobbies or just getting in the car and going to the grocery store and having to shop. If if you're overeating and you're, become overweight, obese, that can have severe physical limitations later in life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And if you look around too, if you frame yourself as like, okay, I'm too busy to go out and go to the store and shop for groceries, so I'm just going to eat out for lunch. I'm going to eat out for dinner, whatever. I mean, it's so limited to find real healthy food when you go out. Even at restaurants, I mean, the portion sizes are going to be ginormous. It's usually going to be food, unless you're very health conscious and active about where you eat. Most places are going to be pretty unhealthy, especially quick lunch places that are going to be not even fast food, but just a quick, in and out kind of place, unless, you put the time in to find the right places. So you have to arm yourself with knowledge, one, and I think it's really cool that, you and I can have this conversation and speak about these things. And one, because I think I think you're in a really cool position because nutrition is really coming to the forefront in people's lives right now, more than I think it ever has. I think there's a platform to have these conversations that haven't been there, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, podcasts, or whatnot. So you have and of course, just your career anyways, but you have the ability to really influence people. People are realizing that this is important. It's really, I think, an exciting time for this. And I'm hoping that we see more changes societally, where these types of foods and these types of diets that are, of course it's personalized, but, maybe more options where there's not a ton of sugar, maybe natural sugar through, fruit or something like that. The hope is that it's changed at a level, especially let's say in schools, kids, if they're going to eat in the lunchroom, they're going to eat what's there unless their parents have packed their lunch. It's like, those are the places where it needs to shift, where it's healthy options, healthy alternatives. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I was eating Hot Pockets and drinking Mountain Dew. Like, no joke, a lot of the time,
Me too.
Me too. So, it's tough, I would imagine, having kids, because they love that. Their friends are eating that. It's like, and you look at your child, I would imagine, I don't have kids or anything, but you're like, oh, well, they're fit. They're at tennis camp or basketball camp. Okay, they can have a Mountain Dew or Capri Sun that's like pure sugar. It's tough. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that as time goes on, there's more of an embrace of these conversations and this lifestyle, rather than the food getting, the food that's easily accessible getting worse and worse for us. That's the hope.
For sure. And the school system is a big place to start, not only from what we're feeding the children there, but also what we're teaching them. And I look back on my educational career and, before I decided I wanted to be a dietitian, I had no nutrition background in a formal education setting. So maybe they go through the food pyramid, but you think about, I had many years of health education, but, maybe only a couple topics or a couple lectures on nutrition. And then you're learning a whole bunch of other things that are also important. But I think there needs to be a big emphasis from a young age on the importance of nutrition. And this kind of goes up the ladder. So I've had patients in the hospital who I bring them my plate, which is like the US dietary guidelines, visual representation of what a plate should look like. And I'll bring it to a patient's bedside and say, have you ever seen this before? And then say, oh, my daughter brought this home from school. So I think that's really good to see, is that, if they can instill it into the children take an interest in it and find it important. If they can bring it home to the parents, and whether the parents are 30 years old, 40 years old and above, it can have a profound impact, because one thing I've learned is that the biggest motivator for people in middle age and as they're getting older is their children and their family.
Yep.
And so that is their primary motivation to make changes and improve their health, to be there for those people. And so if you can have a child come home and say, Mommy, Daddy, like, this is my plate, like, we need to go get vegetables.
Yeah.
That's going to be a huge driving force, more so than anything else, whether that's improving the parent's body or their image. If it's making their child happy and allowing them to live the most fruitful life, then that's what they're going to do.
Yep. Yeah. That's huge. I'm actually surprised of hearing that, you know, that's taught in schools, because I had no idea that. So that's really, really cool.
And the good thing is that's here in the Bronx, New York.
Yeah.
You know, my hospital is in one of the lowest socioeconomic neighborhoods in the state of New York, and probably, you know, you got to rank it somewhere, probably in the country or in the Northeast. And so it's good to see that there's some level of that education going on in our neighborhoods here, and they're trying to improve a disadvantaged society that we have.
Yeah. That's really, really cool that, you know, people, one, are getting access to that information. Because I think once you have access to the information, people don't want to be sick, and people want to live a long time with their family. And, you know, if you find that you're doing something that is not, you know, or let me make sure I'm close enough to this. If you're finding that you're doing things that are hindering your health, of course you have to pass the hurdle of, okay, well, that thing tastes really good, or I have an addiction to this substance, so I want to keep ingesting it. Once you can pass that, you know, that's it. You know, you want to be healthy for your family and friends and such. So I think as long as the information's there, it's going to have a huge impact. And, you know, at the end of the day, you know, you get to be right on the front line of it and pass forward this information, whether it's with the individual in your work, or if it's to your blog where it's reaching more people at a time. You know, you get to have some influence there, and, you know, be able to shift that consciousness, which I think is super, super cool. You know, I just hope in 10, 20 years, this has made like a big shift. I hope that this is kind of like a big ocean liner, and, you know, we're kind of making early on, kind of in this era right now, we're making these small changes, but it changes the trajectory. And then, you know, you look out in the future and it's a real sizable change.
I hate to say it, but, you know, politics plays a big role in it too.
Yeah.
So depending on who's in office and what the views of the administration are, it changes, you know, how the front line of nutrition is being pushed.
Yeah.
And I think in the most recent administration, we've kind of seen some of the pushes that the Obamas were really advocating for kind of fall to the wayside. Yeah. And there was one thing in particular in the beginning of the Trump administration, that was with school lunches, where I think they were just giving a little bit more freedom in what the schools were able to provide. And so a lot of people in the nutrition community kind of saw this as taking a step back.
Yeah.
So it was kind of, you know, moving back on some of the progression that Michelle Obama made.
Yeah.
So that's kind of on the school front, but then also just subsidies for food. So our government does have money, you know, to pay for the production of crops or whatever it may be. And unfortunately, a lot of that is just going to corn and soy, which are used for, you know, a number of industrial purposes, food just being one of them. But if you look at the amount of money that is being funneled into fruits and vegetables, it's basically nothing. And so there needs to be, at some point, there needs to be a major shift into increasing the availability. So take, for instance, the neighborhoods I was just talking to in the Bronx. You know, they can have the education, they can have the knowledge of what they need to do, but the means of actually doing it from a financial standpoint and an availability standpoint is just not there. And so I've had the pleasure of actually riding a bus through local stops from the top of Manhattan all the way up to the northern Bronx just because of a subway issue. And it was one of the most eye-opening experiences for me, because now for the first time, instead of just being on the subway and passing stops where my patients are living, I'm actually driving through all the neighborhoods. And you're seeing when I'm telling a patient, where are you going shopping? Like, if you go shopping, you should look for this.
Right.
That's not always feasible, because the grocery stores up there and the corner stores up there is just a completely different planet than somebody from our walk of life is used to.
Right.
And so you can have that knowledge, but the actual application of that knowledge is not there based on an economic disadvantage or a supply issue that starts from a broad perspective, possibly in the form of local, state, or United States government.
Yeah. I mean, I might not have seen this firsthand, but I can imagine, and as you say, in lower socioeconomical areas, if you go to the corner store and it's Doritos and Mountain Dew, and there's no healthy alternative, and same with the grocery stores, it's like, okay, so someone has to have the education. It's not provided, maybe, and maybe in the lunchrooms it's not there. So then they have to get the education somewhere and then travel, whatever that distance is, to go to a place that has a healthy alternative. Okay, so I'm done at work at 5. I do have time to, take my car and go somewhere and shop. But a lot of people don't have that luxury. They're working multiple jobs, or they don't have access to transportation or whatnot. So suddenly you're constricted by your location, timing, all these different factors, price, of course. If you can have cheaper alternatives that, of course, aren't healthy, sometimes people will have to make that decision. I can do this for this price, and this is going to put food on the table, even if it's not healthy. This is what I have to do at this time. So it's unfortunate, because you can kind of address this in multiple ways. It has to be one, I think, if it's not from the administration level, it has to be through a grassroots movement, which is these types of conversations and the right information getting into the right hands. But it does have to come through an administration as well. And unfortunately, I think what happens is, if you find that there's a regression, it usually will tie back to money. And unfortunately, there's a lot of money behind sugar, and there's a lot of money behind keeping the status quo in terms of nutrition. It can feel like an uphill battle, I think, depending on who's calling the shots and where the money is going. But luckily, I think, one, there's more access to information now than ever. So that's hugely important. At least with getting the information out there. So, that makes me feel more optimistic. But of course, it's a challenging battle to address this. And it just makes me, and I think in general, people agree, it makes you feel really fortunate when you have access to the information, you have access to, just a grocery store around the corner that does have healthy alternatives. You take that stuff for granted. It's incredible. People might look at this and be like, oh, well, I eat kind of things here and there and I'm fine. But, then you realize that poor nutrition over a long period of time, leading to things like diabetes and heart disease being, the number one killer in America. It's like, those are the things that we're dealing with. And, this is something I wanted to kind of bounce off you and talk about a little bit. Is on my girlfriend's side, one of her sisters and the sister's boyfriend, they're both doctors. So they're both in residency now. And they mentioned that in med school, there's never emphasis on nutrition. It's just emphasis on understanding how to patch things up, really, at the end of the day. It's what medical research is there for this pill to address this certain ailment. Or, of course, in surgery, that's kind of a different game. But the conversation is never starting at that early stage of avoiding it with nutrition. It's, once everything has happened, how can we patch it up? And of course, the pharmaceutical industry is making billions of dollars by having X, Y, and Z, pill out there that's going to solve whatever, So it's counterintuitive when you look at it until you realize, okay, where's the money at? The money is in selling the pills, unfortunately. So yeah. I wanted to kind of get your take there, because I mean, it must be frustrating for you to see that you want to address it early on with the nutrition, but oftentimes you're coming in kind of at a later stage when someone's already gone through the whole process. And it's like, okay, let's try and shift this now,
It is very sad in that respect, is that the position I have as a dietitian, which is an inpatient dietitian, seeing people who are hospitalized, a lot of times I am getting people where it is, in a sense, too late. There's no turning back. You have kidney failure, you're on dialysis. There's not turning back from that unless you get a transplant.
Yeah.
Right? You have full-blown diabetes. There's no turning back from that. You can really work hard and put it into remission, but you have diabetes for the rest of your life. And so the damage has already been done. And so we become people who are on the prevention side, but then we're also teaming in on that patch-up work to fix everything. Now, from the doctor's perspective, they have so much that they need to learn to play that role, to be healers, that I think there is a movement more towards prevention and recognizing the importance of nutrition, but I don't ever see it going the full direction where that becomes a full emphasis of medical care, which from my perspective, I'm liking. So it seems, we're seeing an influx of research documenting the lack of nutrition education for medical students and residents moving up the chain of the medical ladder. So it's becoming aware and people are knowing about it. Now it's just a matter of increasing the importance of nutrition in the healthcare setting, because unfortunately at the end of the day, these hospitals and the doctors who are getting paid from them, it's a business, right?
Yeah.
And so there's not a lot of money in prevention. There's really not. And there's not a lot of money in nutrition care in the hospital. We're not a very high paid service in the hospital, because what we do by providing nutrition counseling doesn't bring a lot of money back in. Right. Because the hospital, the way it makes money is by a revolving door.
Yeah.
The more people that come in, the more people that are treated, the more people that are having surgeries and getting medications. Yes, we're helping these people, but it also benefits everybody that's a part of the system by helping those people, by performing those procedures and giving the medications.
Right. It keeps it moving.
It's big business, and it goes up. We're speaking on doctors, but it's a much bigger community than that. It's nurses, nursing assistants, people in the kitchen, people who are working, folding sheets or doing the laundry and stuff. So there's so many jobs at stake by keeping people in the hospital and having people who are sick.
Yeah. Yeah. And you would, I'm sure, agree with this too, but both of them are saying that if you just had proper nutrition, they said most of the people that come in who are having serious ailments, they'd be fine. And I think you'd agree with, diabetes and such, that a lot of those you wouldn't get into that situation due to, they also mentioned the inflammation that comes when you have this improper diet that leads to these diseases. You wouldn't have that with proper nutrition. So it's pretty incredible where we find ourselves in that regard,
I would agree with that 100%. And I do see the same exact thing. People who come in, it can be prevented.
Yeah.
And even just from, an obesity standpoint, I hate to take it there and try to, I don't want to put any blame on obese people or try to stigmatize them in any way. But the matter of the fact is, you go into these hospitals and you go into the intensive care units, and the people who are the sickest, I don't find it a coincidence that most of them are overweight or severely morbidly obese.
Right. Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what somebody is getting, when they're at that size and they're carrying all that extra weight, the care becomes a lot more complicated. Whether that's just doing a surgery or just performing regular nursing care, having yourself and carrying that extra amount of weight on, if it can be avoided or, ameliorated in some kind of behavior change, if you do get sick, keeping that extra weight off is going to help you in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible. I mean, as I say, I don't mean to repeat myself, but we just find ourselves in a really bizarre time, because you've seen, or we've seen how, the diet has shifted, obesity is on the rise, of course. And, they're one and the same. And then you see these illnesses that are brought on by that. It's just, it makes, when you look at everything that's changed in terms of our diet and such, it makes sense to see the outcome in terms of obesity and higher rates of, heart disease and diabetes and such. But it's just, it's addressing it to make the change, to see, to see some change in our future.
For sure.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy, but, Mitch, this has been awesome, man. I really, really, really appreciate it. I think we went into a lot of stuff that I didn't even plan on doing. I feel like it was really cool, man. It was really cool to get your feedback and your take on a lot of this stuff. And yeah, man, I can't say enough that I feel like you're doing something really, really cool where you must feel really fulfilled on a day-to-day basis just based on helping people, and I think the message that you're getting out there is, it's just super important.
I really appreciate you having me on here. It's a pleasure, and I hope to speak again in the future. Maybe I'll come back for a little follow-up.
Absolutely.
Follow up on some of these topics.
Totally.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been good. And I think we did get into a lot, and we kind of moved a little bit away from, cognition and creativity. But
it was cool. Yeah.
Whoever listens to this is certainly going to walk away with, something to think about and maybe a little bit of new information.
Totally. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And I want to do more. So I'm on board. So where can people find you? Just so, I'll be putting this out on iTunes. I'll be putting this out on YouTube, all sorts of places, but just so people can kind of, follow up with your blog, with your Instagram, share that information just so it's out there.
Yeah. So my blog right now is my primary means of communication. So it's at fit_by_Mitch. Fit by Mitch. That's kind of my brand. I started when I was a personal trainer. I've just kind of carried it through. And I'm thinking about going through a little rebranding soon because what I promote and the content I put out doesn't necessarily reflect that. Mm-hmm. But for now, it's Fit by Mitch. You can find me there. You can find me at Mitch Zandes on Facebook. I do have like a professional page. And then soon, probably at the end of the summer, I'm going to have mitchellzandes.com, and that will be my website. So I'm going to take a lot of the content that I've made on Instagram and kind of expand it out and kind of put it into a little nicer read format and hopefully have some other cool stuff on there as well.
Awesome, man. Very cool. Very cool. I like Fit by Mitch, honestly. So that's my vote. I think it sounds good. It rhymes. I don't know.
Yeah, it's perfect. I mean, I love it too. And I hate to walk away from it, but I used to do a lot of fitness videos, and now I just I'm really research and nutrition focused, really pushing forward topics on that. So I think I'm more on like the wellness, nutrition research side than I am fitness. And so I kind of want my name to reflect that. So we'll see where it goes.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll have to do more of these, man. I'm definitely on board.
Awesome. So that is it. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, go check out Mitch at fit_by_Mitch on Instagram. Check out his Instagram, check out his blog. Especially let him know if you listened to the podcast and you liked it. I think that would be super, super cool. And if you did enjoy this podcast, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, subscribe and follow on the iTunes podcast app, follow on Instagram, all those good things. It just helps us grow so I can have more conversation with cool people. That's the idea, is have as many cool conversations as possible. Other things, friends of the show, check out Limitless Vibrations. That is of my friend. He has a podcast where he interviews other musicians. Super, super cool. His name is Hans Ford. I hope he's going to be on the show soon. We talked a little bit about it. That'd be super cool. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Of course, one of the first podcasts, and I hope there's just more and more cool conversations to come.